She thought he was just another quiet customer, until a mysterious boy delivered him a secret document. Minutes later, he left her a note that would change her life forever, along with a check for $250,000. But when she found out who he really was, her heart stopped. From a moment he walked into the tiny coffee shop, something felt different. The bell above the door chimed the same way it always did, the sound blending with the soft hum of the espresso machine and the quiet chatter of early morning regulars. Outside, the city was just beginning to wake up. Taxis honked impatiently. The smell of rain lingered in the air, and thin streams of sunlight fought their way through the clouds. Inside, it was warm and comforting, a little sanctuary away from the rush. It was early morning, the kind where steam rose from paper cups and sleepy customers buried their faces in laptops, chasing deadlines before the day truly began. The overhead lights cast a soft golden glow over the polished counter, where pastries sat neatly in a glass display, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Most people walked in with quick, purposeful steps, their eyes fixed on phones or watches, speaking in hurried tones as if time itself was slipping away from them. But not him. He moved differently, deliberately. He wore a plain charcoal hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers that looked like they had seen years of use. There was no glint of an expensive watch on his wrist, no flashy brand logos, no signs of luxury. Yet, somehow, he didn't blend in. There was a quiet confidence in his walk, an invisible weight to his presence, like he owned the world, or maybe built it piece by piece. It wasn't arrogance, it was something deeper, a calm assurance that didn't need to announce itself. The waitress, Tasha, noticed him right away. She was used to reading people. Years of working behind the counter had taught her to spot the impatient ones, the polite ones, the ones who tipped, and the ones who didn't. She worked double shifts at Harbor Brew almost every day, her life revolving around serving coffee and saving every spare dollar to pay off her mother's mounting medical bills. Every customer was another step closer to that goal. But this man, he didn't look like the usual downtown crowd. He didn't seem hurried, stressed, or distracted. He wasn't just here for caffeine. He was taking in a room, his eyes scanning slowly as if memorizing every detail. When he reached the counter, he didn't behave like a rushed commuter barking out an order. He didn't glance at the menu above her head or fumble for change. Instead, he looked her directly in the eyes, a steady, unhurried gaze that seemed to search for something unspoken. His voice was low and smooth when he finally spoke. Black coffee. No sugar. Simple. No hesitation. No added small talk. But there was something in the way he said it, like the words carried more weight than they should. His tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't casual either. It was intentional. As she rang up the order and began preparing his drink, she couldn't help but feel a strange curiosity rising in her chest. Most people ordered coffee and moved on. This man stayed still, watching her hands as she worked, not in a creepy way, but with a quiet attentiveness that made her almost self-conscious. When she slid the steaming cup across the counter toward him, their fingers brushed for the briefest moment. His hands were warm, unexpectedly warm, and steady, like they belonged to someone who had never once doubted his place in the world. "Thank you," he said softly, the corners of his mouth curving into a faint, polite smile before he stepped away to the far corner of the shop. But as she watched him go, Tasha realized something strange. Her heart was racing, and she had no idea why. She didn't know his name, where he came from, or what he did. But somehow, she had the inexplicable feeling that this was not just another customer, and that this ordinary cup of coffee was about to be the start of something she could never have imagined. He sat at the farthest table in the cafe, the one tucked away in the corner where you could see the entire room without anyone really noticing you. From there, he sipped his coffee slowly, almost deliberately, as if savoring not just the taste but the moment itself. His phone was in his hand, the screen glowing faintly, his thumb moving in a lazy scroll. But Tasha, who had a knack for spotting the subtle things others missed, realized something. He wasn't actually reading or typing. His eyes weren't focused on the phone. They were moving, scanning, quietly taking the people around him. It wasn't the kind of restless scanning you'd expect from someone bored. It was sharper than that. Every gesture, every conversation, every interaction seemed to draw his attention. He noticed the young woman in the corner tapping her foot anxiously as she typed on her laptop, the elderly man who came in every morning at the same time for the same muffin, the barista who kept rubbing her wrist between customers like it was sore. And, of course, he noticed Tasha. At one point, a businessman in a perfectly tailored navy suit strutted into the cafe. His cologne hit the air before his voice did, sharp and overbearing. Without a word of greeting, he stepped ahead of the man in front of him in line, snapping his fingers at Tasha as if she were a servant instead of a human being. "Miss, hey, can we speed this up? I'm in a hurry," he barked. Tasha felt the sting of irritation rise, but years of experience had taught her the value of composure. She kept her warm, practiced smile in place and replied gently, "Sir, I'll be right with you. Just finishing up this order." She turned back to the customer she was helping, giving them her full attention until the transaction was done, before calmly moving on to the impatient businessman. No raised voice, no sarcasm, no visible annoyance. From across the room, the man in the hoodie watched the entire thing unfold. His expression didn't change. No smirk, no glare, not even a tilt of the head. He simply absorbed it, like a camera recording details for later. A little while later, when a morning rush had thinned, he raised his hand slightly, signaling for Tasha to come over. She walked to his table, balancing her notepad in one hand, even though she knew he hadn't ordered anything else. "Mind if I ask you something?" he said, his voice low but clear. "Sure," she replied. "Why?" he began slowly. "Do you never lose your cool with rude people?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers didn't notice things like that. She let out a small laugh and shrugged. "Because you never know what someone's going through," she said. "Maybe they're having the worst day of their life. Maybe something awful happened this morning. My job is to make it a little better, not worse." Her tone was light, but the words carried weight. They weren't something she'd memorized from a customer service handbook. They came from years of experience, and maybe even from a part of her own story she didn't talk about much. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes softening in a way that suggested he understood more than he let on. But he didn't give her the satisfaction of a reply. Instead, he reached into his bag, pulling out a small leather-bound notepad. The cover was worn at the edges, like it had been used for years. He flipped it open, uncapped a pen, and began scribbling something quickly. His handwriting was neat but quick, as though the words were spilling out faster than he could contain them. Tasha tilted her head slightly, trying to catch a glimpse, but he angled the page away. When he finished, he tore out the page with care, folded it twice, and tucked it deep into the inside pocket of his hoodie. Then, without looking up, he slid the notepad back in his bag and capped his pen. Tasha felt a flicker of curiosity. What had he written? Why did it seem so deliberate? People didn't usually write notes in cafes unless they were working, and this man didn't look like he was drafting a business plan or jotting down grocery items. But just as quickly as the moment came, it was gone. He leaned back in his chair, lifted his cup, and took another slow sip of his coffee, his gaze drifting once again toward the other customers. Whatever he had written, it was for him alone, at least for now. And yet, something about the way he'd done it left Tasha with the unshakable feeling that those words, hidden in his pocket, would matter to her before the day was over. An hour had passed, and the usual rhythm of the cafe had returned. Machines hissing, chairs scraping, quiet conversations blending into the background hum. The man in the hoodie still sat in his corner, the same untouched coffee cup in front of him, his attention shifting between the room and something only he seemed to know. He hadn't ordered anything else, hadn't moved except to occasionally glance at the door as if he was waiting for someone. Tasha, who had been wiping down tables, noticed his stillness. It wasn't the idle kind. It was the focused, purposeful kind, like he was holding his breath for an event that hadn't happened yet. She thought about going over to check if he needed anything, maybe offer a refill, but before she could take a step, the cafe door swung open with a quick, eager chime. A young boy burst inside, his cheeks flushed from the cold outside. He couldn't have been more than 12, and the delivery uniform he wore was clearly 2 sizes too big, the sleeves nearly covering his hands. His sneakers squeaked against the floor as he hurried straight toward the man in the hoodie. "Sir, I have that document you asked for," the boy said, slightly out of breath, holding out a thick, sealed envelope with both hands. The man looked up, his calm composure unshaken. He accepted the envelope with a nod and slid his thumb onto the seal, opening it just enough to glance at the contents. Whatever he saw inside made his eyes darken, not in anger, but in a deep, shadowed way, as if the words on the page carried a weight only he could feel. It was gone in a second, his face returning to its unreadable calm, but Tasha caught that flicker of something. He folded the paper back neatly, tucked it into the inner pocket of his hoodie, and reached into his jeans. Pulling out a folded bill, he placed it into the boy's hand. "For your trouble," he said quietly. The boy's eyes widened at the amount, but before he could say thank you, the man gave a subtle nod toward the door. The boy obeyed, disappearing back into the busy street, the oversized uniform flapping in the wind as he ran. The cafe felt strangely quieter after that, as though something significant had just taken place without anyone else realizing it. The man stood up, walking toward the counter with an easy, measured pace. Tasha instinctively straightened, ready to ring him up, though it was only the coffee he was paying for. As she prepared to tell him the amount, he set the empty cup on the counter, but not before slipping something small and folded underneath it. He didn't say much, didn't make a scene, just leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Don't open this until after I leave." His tone was calm, almost gentle, but there was a hint of something in it. Urgency? Seriousness? She couldn't tell, but it was enough to make her pause. Tasha blinked in confusion. Okay, she said, her voice uncertain. He offered a polite smile in return, the kind that was courteous yet gave nothing away. With that, he slid a few bills across the counter for his drink and turned toward the door. The bell above the entrance jingled softly as he stepped out, swallowed instantly by the morning crowd outside. He didn't look back. Within seconds, he was gone, lost among the endless stream of strangers on the street, as if he had never been there at all. For a moment, Tasha just stood there, staring at the empty space where he had been, her mind wrestling between curiosity and caution. Then, remembering his words, she lifted the cup from the counter. There it was, a small, tightly folded piece of paper, creased sharply like it had been handled with care. Her fingers hesitated for a second before picking it up. It felt heavier than it should, as though the paper itself carried some kind of weight. She glanced around the cafe. No one seemed to be watching. Slowly, she unfolded it, the crinkle of paper sounding louder than the coffee machine in the background. Her hands began to tremble, though she didn't yet know why. The first glimpse of ink made her pulse quicken. She opened it fully, and what she saw inside made her breath catch in her throat. The note wasn't long. It was so brief, in fact, that at first glance it hardly seemed worth the weight her heart gave it. Just one single line at the top, written in neat, precise handwriting that almost felt too intentional to be casual. "I'm not who you think I am." Her brows drew together in confusion, the words echoing silently in her mind. Who did she think he was? Just a quiet customer in a hoodie, someone passing through for a cup of coffee like 100 others she served every day. But even before she could turn the words over in her head, her eyes drifted lower. That's when the breath caught in her throat. Attached to the note with a small silver paperclip was something she almost didn't believe at first. A check. Her eyes landed on the numbers, and her vision seemed to blur for a moment as her brain struggled to accept what she was seeing. $250,000. $250,000. Written neatly, in black ink, as if it were the most ordinary amount in the world. Her fingers began to tremble. She held the paper tighter, afraid it might slip away if she loosened her grip, afraid that somehow, if she blinked too long, she'd wake up and find it gone. Then she saw the memo line. 3 simple words stared back at her. "For your mother's care." Her knees went weak, the counter behind her becoming her only support. The rest of the cafe faded into a distant blur, the hiss of milk steaming, the low hum of voices, the scrape of chairs. All of it muffled under the deafening rush of her own heartbeat in her ears. She lifted her head, scanning the room instinctively. The corner table where he had been sitting was empty now. She turned toward the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of him among the crowd outside. But the street was filled only with strangers, people rushing to work, heads down against the wind, their faces unremarkable and unfamiliar. He was gone. The only clue was the name printed neatly at the top of the check, Ethan Crosswell. Her breath hitched again. She knew that name. Everyone did. It wasn't just another signature. It was a brand, a symbol. She'd seen it in headlines, heard it on financial news, read about it in articles she'd skimmed while waiting for her bus. Ethan Crosswell wasn't simply wealthy. He was a self-made billionaire. A man who had built a tech empire from nothing, who was rumored to be worth billions. He lived in a world far from hers, a world of boardrooms, private jets, and magazine covers. And yet, here he had been, in her cafe, dressed like an ordinary man, sitting in the corner with a plain cup of coffee. Her thoughts tumbled over themselves, trying to make sense of it. Why here? Why her? She thought back to their brief exchanges, the way he had watched her without judgment, the quiet question about why she stayed calm with rude customers, the unreadable expression when she'd answered. None of it explained this. None of it could possibly justify the staggering figure in her hands. Her eyes burned, and before she knew it, tears were sliding down her cheeks. This wasn't a tip. It wasn't even just a generous gesture. This was salvation. For months, she had been fighting a losing battle, working double shifts, skipping meals to save money, lying awake at night, wondering how she was going to cover the next round of her mother's medical bills. Her mom's surgery wasn't optional. It was urgent. But every time Tasha thought she was close to affording it, another expense would set her back. The numbers had never added up. Until now. With this check, she could pay for the surgery outright. She could settle the bills, keep the lights on, and still have enough left over to breathe for the first time in years. The crushing weight she had been carrying for so long suddenly felt like it might lift. She thought of her mother's face, pale, lined with exhaustion, yet still able to smile through the pain. She imagined walking through the front door with this news, telling her it was over, that everything was going to be okay. She could see the relief flooding her mother's eyes, hear the sound of her laugh after so many months of worry. Tasha pressed the check to her chest, her tears dripping onto the paper. It felt unreal, like a scene from someone else's life. And yet, here it was in her hands. Somewhere out there, Ethan Crosswell was already gone, blending into the crowd, leaving nothing behind but a folded note, a signature, and a question that would haunt her for a long time. Why me? And though she didn't know the answer yet, she knew one thing for certain. Her life and her mother's had just changed forever. The next morning, the air was crisp, the streets still damp from a light drizzle the night before. Tasha fumbled with the keys as she unlocked the cafe's glass door, yawning away the remnants of sleep. She was still thinking about the events of yesterday, the note, the check, the name on it, when the low, steady hum of an engine pulled her attention to the street. A sleek black luxury car, polished to a mirror shine, glided up to the curb outside. It looked completely out of place against the worn brick buildings and narrow sidewalks of her little neighborhood. For a moment, she assumed it was just passing through. But then, the driver's door opened. Out stepped Ethan Crosswell. This time, he wasn't dressed like a man trying to blend in. The plain hoodie and scuffed sneakers were gone, replaced by a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that seemed made for him. The shine on his shoes, the clean cut of his jacket, the watch glinting subtly on his wrist. It all spoke of wealth and precision. He moved with the same calm confidence as before, but now it was clear to everyone watching that this was a man accustomed to commanding rooms. He stepped through the cafe door, the small brass bell above it chiming gently. Before Tasha could even greet him, he spoke, his voice warm yet weighted with something deeper. "I owe my life to someone like you." She froze, halfway between reaching for a rag to wipe the counter and opening her mouth to say good morning. The words didn't make sense, at least not yet. Her confusion must have been plain because he gave a small, knowing smile and continued. Years ago, he told her, long before the billions and the boardrooms, he had been just another struggling young man trying to survive in the city. He'd been broke, sleeping in a cheap rented room, chasing ideas that seemed too big for someone with so little. In those days, every dollar mattered. Most mornings, he would walk past a small diner on his way to work, a place that smelled of fresh coffee and warm toast. He could rarely afford to buy anything, but the aroma alone made him feel less alone in the world. One morning, the waitress behind the counter, an older black woman with kind eyes, noticed him lingering by the door. Without asking, she poured a steaming cup of coffee and slid it toward him. "On the house," she'd said. He tried to refuse, embarrassed, but she waved him off. It didn't happen just once. Every morning after that, she had a cup ready for him. No questions, no pity, just quiet generosity. She didn't know it then, Ethan said, his voice softening. But those mornings kept me going. When everything else in my life told me I was going to fail, she made me feel seen. She believed in me before I believed in myself. Tasha felt her throat tighten as he spoke. She could picture it. The weary young man, the warm diner, the quiet kindness of a stranger who never asked for anything in return. He told her he had been traveling incognito for months now, visiting small businesses and places off the beaten path. He wanted to see how people treated others when they thought no one important was watching. "You reminded me of her," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Kindness without an agenda. That's rare. Tasha didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for the moment. All she could do was step around the counter and hug him, the check from yesterday still folded safely in her bag. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." He held the hug for a moment, then pulled back with a smile that seemed both proud and a little wistful. As he reached the door, he turned back, the sunlight from outside catching on the edge of his suit. "One day, when you can, pass it on," he said. "You never know whose life you might change." Then he stepped out, the bell chiming again as the door closed behind him. The black car pulled away, disappearing into the flow of traffic, leaving nothing but the faint scent of his cologne and the echo of his words. And just like that, the undercover billionaire was gone. But his note, and the hope it had brought, stayed with Tasha. She knew she would never forget the man who saw her not just as a waitress, but as a person whose kindness mattered. She promised herself that one day, when she could, she would pass it on, because sometimes the smallest act could change the entire course of someone's life. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.